Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into my official college football bold predictions here for championship week, where I reveal my top bold picks, and I'll also reveal all of my predictions on the New Year's Six Bowls based off of how I think the results are going to go this weekend, and we'll go through that on the second slide. So starting, this is the Friday night game, USC. I do have them losing, a very close, higher scoring game, possibly 37-34 to Utah. Ohio State enters as the number 4 seed. Utah goes to the Rose Bowl because they win the Pac-12, and they take on Penn State because Ohio State gets bumped up. Michigan obviously also already into the playoff. Penn State versus Utah is my prediction on the Rose. USC ends up in another New Year's Six Bowl, possibly versus Tulane. I believe that would be the Cotton, maybe. And I do think, guys, I've said it multiple times, I feel like Utah is the more complete team. Now, maybe that won't matter because USC does have the better overall player. Caleb Williams is better than anyone on Utah, but I do think it is also important to note USC's had a very lucky turnover margin. The advanced analytics do not like USC. Many of the advanced analytics actually have USC ranked like 10th or 11th, and that's because of their lucky turnover margin. It's because of their porous defense. They're allowing a significant amount of yards per game. They rank in the mid-60s in terms of total defensive efficiency. They are a flawed football team. That doesn't mean they can't make the playoffs. Many flawed teams have made the playoffs, and they do have the Heisman Trophy, future winning quarterback in Caleb Williams. So certainly it's going to be a great game. The Pac-12's had a great year, and I'm sure the Pac-12 and their most of their fans are probably really rooting for USC. They need a playoff team. Quite frankly, they deserve a playoff team because they have a very solid conference, but I think that, I'm going to trust the analytics. I'm going to trust Utah football, who's really been kind of disrespected, especially going all the way back to their week 1 loss. People have kind of forgotten about them. They have great analytical numbers. They've got a very solid defense, a very solid offense. They are a complete team. And this comes down to maybe a late play or two. Maybe they get a sack on Caleb Williams, an interception, something like that. They pull one out late, and they end up in the Rose Bowl, that'd be an amazing matchup with Penn State. Certainly good for the Rose Bowl. TCU wins a shootout, and they face Michigan in the playoffs in the 2v3 matchup. Guys, it just feels like it's TCU's time to make the playoffs, and I've got them winning a higher scoring game against Kansas State. Kansas State currently ranked 10th. If they lose to TCU, that would be their 3rd loss. I still think they have a good shot of making a New Year's Six Bowl because they've been really good this year. But TCU, it feels right. Even if they're losing in this game, they always seem to come back, especially in these Big 12 games. They're going to do it again, and they're going to end up being the number 3 seed, going undefeated, going 13-0, and they got a matchup with Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl, in my opinion. Michigan and Georgia both play sleep fests and win. So, guys, I will say, with college football tends to always surprise us, and I feel like we all expect these games to go a certain way, Michigan and Georgia. I feel like we all think they're going to be boring, and we all think the favorites are going to win. Now, whether or not they'll cover, maybe, there's a backdoor cover by LSU or Purdue. The expectation is Georgia wins, it'll be boring. Michigan wins, it'll probably be boring. It feels like when we all think that with college football, I'm not saying Michigan's going to get upset by Purdue. I'm not saying Georgia's going to get upset, but maybe one of these games, because we all think they're going to be crap, maybe one of them is really entertaining. I'm just saying, normally that's how college football works. We saw last year Michigan annihilate Iowa 42-3. So I don't know, but both of those games we all think should be relatively easy, and the expectation is Michigan captures another Big Ten title, Georgia captures another SEC title in both of those games. They're both 16-point favorites. Clemson hangs on versus North Carolina, and we get a nice fun little game. You know what? We need the ACC. It's been so bad this year, but it can end on a good note. This game for a chance to make a New Year's Six bowl, I think Clemson does enough. They've got enough talent. They've been a weird team this season. They're so much more talented than every ACC team, but it's just they can't put it together. They remind me a lot of Alabama in terms of their defense. They're loaded, but they just are not elite. Like, there's something wrong there. So either way, I'll say Clemson wins maybe a fun game by a field goal. Tulane wins high-scoring game versus UCF. I got it at 30-27, and they make a New Year's Six bowl. It feels like Tulane's year. They got their head coach back, and I've got them winning this game against UCF. Both Ohio and Toledo get into the 40s or at least the high 30s. Both getting into the 40s, maybe like 44-41. It's the MAC. It's a dome. These are two decent enough offenses. We're going to see a high-scoring game for sure, in my opinion. And you know what? It should be a close game. Right now, Toledo is 1.5-point favorites. They haven't been good recently. That is another noon game on Saturday. UTSA hammers North Texas. They finish 11-2, so that is the Friday night 7:30 game right before the Pac-12 championship. And UTSA really should be ranked. They're a very solid team. We respect them. They go 11-2. They crush a North Texas team who really, especially their offense, has been trending down recently. And we see UTSA really have a nice season with Frank Harris at quarterback. Fresno State controls Boise State, and they get into a really good bowl. Fresno State is on a warpath right now. I mean, we've got several teams. Florida State, Penn State, Fresno State, Notre Dame until last week. These teams are playing so much better later in the season. Fresno State is no exception. I'll say what. Fresno State has a legitimate excuse. Their quarterback was out earlier this year. They've got him back. They're +3 on the spread. I think they win that game outright. They're really good. If USC loses, the Pac-12 will be amazing in bowls. So it's just something to note. If USC loses and they fall out of the playoff, I mean, the Pac-12 is going to, in my opinion, do very well in bowls because they've got a lot of really good teams and none of them would be in the playoffs. They'd all get knocked down a bowl spot to make room for USC if they aren't involved in the playoff. And they are a really deep conference, so I could see that playing out. Penn State to the Rose Bowl no matter what. So guys, the situation right now with Ohio State and their relationship with the Rose Bowl is very ugly. Last year, Ohio State lost to Michigan. Nobody, the fan base was dejected. There wasn't a big turnout for the Rose Bowl. Obviously, this year it would only be worse. I think it would benefit everyone in a situation where USC, TCU, they both win. Ohio State is left out. You need to send Penn State to the Rose Bowl. It would just be really bad, especially if we got like a rematch, Washington, Ohio State. Back, Urban Meyer's last game, if they did that rematch, I mean, there would be nobody that shows up to that game from Ohio State, So, the mindset is like, oh, it's the consolation bowl. So I would say with the Rose Bowl, it would be smart for them. You need to not take Ohio State. The fans will not show up. They're pissed off. People say the fan base is spoiled. I think there's a lot more spoiled fan bases than Ohio State. Ohio State is very nice and things like that, so I don't agree with that. But Penn State should be in the Rose Bowl. They played such a fun Rose Bowl game against USC and Sam Darnold with Saquon back in like 2016. That's just my opinion on that. And then, guys, these are my official predictions on the New Year's Six game. So right now we've got the Peach Bowl. That game is in Atlanta, Georgia. Ohio State taking on Georgia, so Georgia certainly will have the home crowd advantage. And Georgia, in terms of the Vegas spread, would be a projected 6-point favorite. We have the Fiesta Bowl. That game would be in Arizona. Michigan would certainly have the crowd advantages. They just have a bigger alum base than TCU, even though it's closer to TCU, the game location. Michigan right around an 8-point favorite in that one. Both of those teams would be entering undefeated, 13-0. The Orange Bowl. How about Clemson and Alabama? This is kind of where it gets cringy because Alabama Bryce Young not playing, very likely. He'll opt out. Will Anderson will opt out. Few players on Alabama's secondary will opt out. So, that's unfortunate why we need the playoff expanded and things like that. But that is just the Orange Bowl projection. Maybe Nick Saban has a crazy, culture and Bryce Young plays. Could you imagine that? The Sugar Bowl, Tennessee versus Kansas State. I think this is a fair matchup for both teams. Tennessee, without their starting quarterback, they still showed, that they can win games. They played well with Joe Milton there. And, even though it was against Vanderbilt, it was an impressive win because Vanderbilt had been playing better and winning 56-0. So, and then Kansas State, you lose to TCU. It's tough, but you're still a good football team. You've had a great year, and you definitely have a chance to beat Tennessee. I know a lot of people were mad that Tennessee was ranked behind Alabama in the rankings last night. It's just simply due to the injury. That's why it's there. They put Alabama at number 6 because Hendon Hooker is out. The Rose Bowl would be Penn State versus Utah. So Utah, a repeat, but Penn State is some new blood there. I think it would be a fine matchup, Penn State-Utah. If it's not Penn State-Utah, I think it's going to be Penn State and Washington. Again, I don't think they're going to take Ohio State again. The fan base would not show up. And then the Cotton Bowl is USC versus Tulane. So that would certainly be a significant gut punch if USC kind of got that big of a step down. I know there's a few different common projections right now. I've seen a lot of Clemson versus Alabama. I've also seen a lot of Kansas State versus Alabama in the Sugar. And I've seen some Tennessee versus Clemson in an all-orange bowl. I've also seen TCU versus Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. So there's a lot of different scenarios. These are just my predictions based on which teams are going to win, which teams are going to lose. Very likely they're not going to play out exactly like this. And again, the most common thing I've seen with Alabama is actually in the Sugar Bowl against Kansas State, and then Penn State in the Cotton Bowl against Tulane. But I think the Rose Bowl will take Penn State. How it works, at least I believe I was told, the Rose Bowl, if Michigan obviously wins the Big Ten championship, the Rose Bowl can pick who they want, and they can take Penn State. So, if Purdue somehow wins, they'll go to the Rose Bowl, which would be hilarious. But the expectation is Michigan wins. They're not going to the Rose Bowl. They're going to the playoff. So it's like, who do you pick? And I think they're going to pick Penn State because Ohio State went last year. So that is just my thought process on that. We will see what happens. I know that they talked about it last night on the show, that maybe Ohio State would not go to the Rose Bowl. Penn State would be there. And honestly, I think if you're the Rose Bowl, the matchup that you would want would be, listen, Penn State, Utah is probably pretty good. Penn State, Washington, maybe. Guys, Washington is really interesting. Washington doesn't strike me as a team that the analytics would like, but I was looking up what the BCF analytics would have the rankings currently. And Washington, who is currently 12th by the committee, they're ranked 12th, which to me seems fair. They have a bad defense. The BCS analytical model ranks Washington 9th. So I was like, that is surprising. That I didn't think Washington was that good, even though it's a tough Pac-12. They're 10-2. That did surprise me. So good for Washington. Washington most certainly is hoping for a USC win this weekend because that would guarantee they would make the Rose Bowl, or at least they would be the next team up to make the Rose Bowl. So we will see, guys. Either way, that's going to do it for my bold predictions here for championship week. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.